Good night, darling, my daughter-in-law cooed as she turned the key from the outside, locking my bedroom door. Through the window, I watched them outside, the faint glint of metal cans, the unmistakable slosh of gasoline. My son struck a match, his smile reflected in the window's glass. Their plan was simple: burn the house, claim the insurance, and inherit my $3 billion fortune. Only, when they returned from their alibi dinner, I was sitting in the living room, alive, with the fire marshal and 2 police officers waiting beside me. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit like and subscribe. Let me tell you how a 72-year-old woman who built a tech empire from her kitchen table discovered her own family thought she was worth more dead than alive, and how they learned just how wrong they were. 6 hours earlier, I was lying in a hospital bed, pretending to be deeply sedated. My son, Daniel, and his wife, Emily, whispered just 3 feet away. They thought I couldn't hear. They were wrong. The pills aren't working fast enough, Emily muttered. She could live another decade at this rate, Daniel replied. Emily's voice sharpened. Then we do it at home. Tonight. Fire accident, quick, clean. My heart raced, but I kept my breathing slow. These 2 had been slipping me doses of digitalis for months, disguising it as heart medication. They thought I was fading, confused. But what I really was, furious. I founded Horizon Dynamics in 1988, coding prototypes on a second-hand computer. By 2012, we were a global name. I sold my shares for $3 billion, keeping enough stock to stay comfortable. Daniel had always been lazy, all charm, no discipline. Emily was worse, clever, cold, and once a pharmaceutical rep, she knew exactly how to mimic dementia symptoms. That night, Daniel helped me from the car with tender concern, the perfect son. Emily handed me tea laced with more poison, kissed my forehead, and smiled. Sleep well, Mom. We're off to dinner. Jeffrey's, 7:30. The restaurant was 45 minutes away, the perfect alibi. As soon as their headlights vanished, I made my move. This is Margaret Ellis, I told my private security line. Activate Code 7. Code 7 meant imminent family threat. Within minutes, the fire department and police were on standby. I gathered everything: fake medication bottles, forged insurance papers, and financial records showing Daniel's $2 million in gambling debt. By the time I saw headlights return, I was ready. The smell hit them first. Gasoline. They'd poured it everywhere, certain I'd be inside, asleep forever. But when they opened the door, expecting a corpse, they found me sitting comfortably, sipping tea. Beside me stood Fire Marshal Grant and Detective Olivia Reed. Mom? Daniel stammered. Thank God you're safe. We smelled smoke. How thoughtful, I said. Especially since you're the ones who started it. The silence was perfect. Emily blinked, then slipped into performance mode. Margaret, you're confused. We just got back from dinner. Really? Said the fire marshal. Funny, we found accelerant around the foundation and your fingerprints on the cans. Daniel's face drained. That's impossible. Detective Reed held up her notepad. Mrs. Ellis reports seeing 2 individuals pouring liquid around the house at 8:15 p.m. Hard to do if you were at Jeffrey's, 45 minutes away. Emily's composure cracked. She's making this up. She's been having delusions. Delusions? I smiled sweetly. Then what's this? I slid a USB drive across the table. Security footage. And blood tests showing the poison you've been feeding me. Emily froze. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. Mom, please, he whispered. We were only trying to help you. Help me die. I asked. You really should have done your homework, sweetheart. Digitalis poisoning mimics dementia, but it doesn't destroy memory. I remember everything. Detective Reed stood. Mr. and Mrs. Ellis, you're both coming with us. Daniel panicked. You can't believe her, she's senile. I laughed softly. Oh, honey. There's nothing senile about rewriting a will this morning, without either of your names on it. By dawn, the media had descended like vultures. Billionaire matriarch outsmarts murder plot, the headlines read. Family greed turns deadly. I watched from my kitchen window, sipping fresh coffee from my favorite mug, the one that says world's most dangerous grandma. My lawyer arrived looking exhausted. Margaret, this is going to be messy. Good, I said, smiling. Let it be messy. At least I'm alive to enjoy it. If you love real emotional stories, hit subscribe, we post one every day. I want Daniel and Emily to understand exactly what they've lost, I told Philip as I poured another cup of coffee. The police are charging them with attempted murder, arson, and conspiracy. And Emily, she's got a new addition to her list, drug trafficking. Turns out the digitalis she used requires a prescription. She stole it from her old pharmaceutical contacts. I smiled grimly. My investigators traced the serial numbers. Very sloppy for someone who thought she was clever. Philip exhaled, rubbing his temples. Margaret, they're your son and daughter-in-law. Are you absolutely sure you want to take this all the way? The coffee cup hit the table harder than I intended. Philip, they tried to burn me alive. They poisoned me for months. Tell me, how much loyalty should I show to people who see me as a walking bank account? I understand your anger, he said carefully, but Daniel is your only child. Then maybe he should have thought about that before trying to murder his mother for profit. My phone buzzed. A message from Detective Reed, lab confirms digitalis in food samples. Video admissible. Case solid. I held the screen toward Philip. I didn't survive the tech industry by being sentimental. I survived by being smarter than the people trying to destroy me. A knock echoed from the front door. Through the glass, I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Cooper, holding a casserole. Behind her stood 3 others, Mr. Patterson, Mrs. Chen, and young Sarah from next door, all with worried faces and covered dishes. Margaret, dear, Mrs. Cooper said as I opened the door. We heard about everything. We brought food. Minutes later, my kitchen was filled with neighbors I'd barely spoken to in 15 years. They'd all seen the news, but more than that, they'd all had their suspicions about Daniel and Emily. That boy never came around unless he wanted something, Mr. Patterson muttered. And that wife of his, Mrs. Chen added, shaking her head. Always asking questions about your will. I thought it was odd. Sarah spoke up quietly. Mrs. Ellis, I have some of their arguments recorded. They were shouting loud enough for me to hear through the walls. Should I give the recordings to the police? Absolutely, I said. 20 minutes later, Detective Reed arrived to collect what was now a mountain of community evidence. Turns out I wasn't the only one who'd been documenting my would-be killers. When the last neighbor left, I felt something I hadn't expected, gratitude. Not for surviving, because I never doubted I would, but for realizing I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. The phone rang again. Philip's voice came through, tight with news. Margaret, Daniel and Emily's bail hearing is tomorrow. The prosecutor's asking for $2 million each. Perfect, I said. They don't have $2 million. That's why they tried to kill me in the first place. Margaret, Philip warned gently. Go to that hearing, I said. And look my son in the eye. Tell him I hope he enjoys his time in prison thinking about what family really means. The next morning's hearing was poetic justice in a courthouse. I wore my best navy suit and the pearl necklace my late husband had given me on our anniversary. If Daniel was going to see me, I wanted him to remember what he'd thrown away. He looked awful, hollow eyes, orange jumpsuit, trembling hands. Jail hadn't been kind. The guards mentioned he was going through cocaine withdrawal. Emily sat beside him, her usual polish stripped away, replaced by the dull exhaustion of county detention. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Patricia Valdez, presented the case with surgical precision. Your Honor, these defendants systematically poisoned a 72-year-old woman, then attempted to burn her alive to claim insurance money. Daniel's public defender stammered through some nonsense about family tension and poor judgment. Emily's expensive lawyer tried to sell the idea that she was a loving caretaker, driven to desperation by my supposed mental decline. That's when Judge Helen Crawford turned to me. Mrs. Ellis, you're present in court. Would you like to make a statement? I rose slowly, using my cane for emphasis. Your Honor, I built a technology company from my kitchen table. I employed 3,000 people, paid my taxes, donated millions to charity. I did it alone after my husband died when my son was 12. The courtroom went still. I loved my son unconditionally. Paid for his schooling, his wedding, his house, his debts. When he married Emily, I welcomed her as family. And they repaid that love by trying to kill me for money they were too lazy to earn. I looked straight at Daniel. Your Honor, they saw an old woman and thought she'd be easy prey. They were wrong. When I sat down, the room was silent enough to hear the air vents hum. Judge Crawford adjusted her glasses. Bail is set at $5 million each. These defendants pose a clear threat to the victim and the public. $5 million. Even if they'd succeeded, they couldn't have paid that. As they were led out, Emily shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. Daniel only wept. Outside, reporters surged forward. Mrs. Ellis, how do you feel seeing your son arrested? Relieved, I said. For months, I thought I was losing my mind. Turns out I was just being murdered. I paused. There's comfort in knowing the difference. Will you visit them in jail? Someone shouted. I thought about it. I've spent my life forgiving everything and forgetting nothing. It nearly got me killed. So maybe now I'll try the opposite, remember everything, forgive nothing. That quote ended up everywhere. But the real satisfaction came 3 hours later when Philip called again. Margaret, interesting development, Daniel's cellmate is a man named Rodriguez. Killed his own mother for insurance money. How poetic, I murmured. Rodriguez has already explained to Daniel what happens to people who kill their mothers, in colorful detail. I smiled, genuinely this time. Philip, I think I'll sleep beautifully tonight. 2 weeks later, I stood inside Daniel and Emily's empty house while movers packed boxes. The bank had foreclosed, apparently Daniel had been dipping into more accounts than I'd realized. Mrs. Ellis, the moving foreman said carefully, handing me a manila envelope. We found this in a safe. Inside were multiple insurance policies, not just on my life, but my home, my car, my jewelry. Emily had been planning for every contingency. At the bottom was a handwritten letter in Daniel's familiar scrawl. I stared at it for a long time before folding it shut. Some things, I decided, are better left unread. Margaret, I can't do this anymore. She's my mother. Find another way. Daniel's voice trembled on the recorded message. Dated 2 days before their arrest. So, my son had developed a conscience, how touching. Unfortunately, it had arrived about 4 months too late. My phone rang. Detective Olivia Reed. Mrs. Ellis, we've had a development. Emily has agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Cooperate how? She's claiming Daniel was the mastermind. Says she acted under duress, afraid for her safety if she didn't go along with his plan. I laughed, a dry, bitter sound even to my own ears. Of course she is. Emily's always been cleverer than Daniel. She's just calculated which one of them is more likely to get the death penalty. There's more, Reed continued. She's also accusing you of years of emotional manipulation. Says Daniel felt trapped by your financial control. Financial control. I could feel my pulse rising. I paid for everything they ever had without asking for a single thing in return. What control does generosity exert? According to her statement, you used money to control them, threatened to cut them off when they disagreed with you, made them feel inferior. The audacity was almost impressive. Detective Reed, I have 30 years of bank records proving every dollar I gave my son. Find me one instance where I demanded anything in exchange. That's actually why I'm calling. The prosecutor wants to meet with you. Emily's defense is pivoting, she's painting you as a manipulative matriarch who pushed them to desperation. When? Tomorrow, 9 a.m. After she hung up, I stood in what used to be Daniel's house, now a crime scene of betrayal, and felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty. Not about my innocence, that was absolute, but about whether a jury would see it the same way. It would be effortless, I realized, to cast a wealthy widow as controlling. To convince a jury that $3 billion came with invisible strings. In the master bedroom, the same one where Emily had planned my death, I found what she'd missed during her frantic escape, prescription bottles with my name on them. Heart medication. Every one of them laced with digitalis. But Emily never understood what makes a person truly powerful. You don't just build wealth, you build records. I called Philip Kane, my attorney. Access my private files, I said. Security code 7749. There's a folder labeled Family Financial History. Bring everything to the prosecutor's office tomorrow. Margaret, what exactly are we talking about here? 30 years of proof, every payment, every bailout, every conversation about money. If Emily wants to play the victim, let's show the jury what kind of victim tries to burn her benefactor alive. How detailed are these records? I smiled faintly. Philip, I didn't become a billionaire by trusting people's memories. I have everything. That night, in my temporary penthouse, its security tighter than the White House, I sat surrounded by documents chronicling 3 decades of motherhood. Daniel's college tuition, $180,000. His wedding, $75,000. 3 cars, $95,000. Credit card debt paid 5 times, $340,000. Gambling debts, $2.1 million. Total, $2.79 million. Requests for repayment, 0. Expressions of gratitude, not enough to count on one hand. By morning, I was ready for war. The prosecutor, Patricia Valdez, had my records spread across every inch of her office, bank statements, receipts, transcripts, even time-stamped photos of Daniel flaunting expensive gifts. Mrs. Ellis, she said, scanning a particularly incriminating transfer, this is extraordinary. You've documented every financial exchange with your son for 30 years. In my business, facts outlive feelings, I said. I learned early that memory is a negotiable thing. She held up a recorder. And these calls. I started recording our money conversations after his first gambling fiasco in 2019. Daniel's recollections were creative. We listened to one from 6 months ago. Mom, please, I'm dead if you don't help me. They're serious people. Daniel, this is the 4th time. What am I supposed to believe? I swear, this is the last time. No more gambling. My voice on the tape was tired. Transfer the money, Philip. All of it. Patricia paused. You paid every time. She switched to another recording. Now, Emily's statement. Emily's voice filled the room. Daniel and I were under constant pressure. Margaret used money to control us. We were prisoners. The irony was exquisite. Prisoners in a mansion, driving a BMW, wearing designer clothes, all paid for by the supposed oppressor. Patricia's tone sharpened. Listen to this one, 3 weeks before the fire. Daniel again, Mom, Emily, and I think it's time you considered assisted living. Assisted living. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. You've been forgetful. You missed a charity payment. You never miss payments. Of course I'd missed it. I was being slowly poisoned. My mind fogged by digitalis. But now, hearing the smugness in his tone, I understood, it wasn't concern. It was preparation. Patricia met my eyes. They weren't just trying to steal your money. They were sabotaging your mind to justify it later. Their scheme was disturbingly methodical: create dementia symptoms through poisoning, document my confusion, then declare me incompetent. And when the evidence was ready, remove the obstacle. There's something else, Patricia said. We found Emily's computer. She'd been researching inheritance laws, how to speed probate for wealthy estates. Look. Printouts detailed her searches. How long does probate take after homicide? Inheritance rights when spouse is in prison. Life insurance payouts in fire-related deaths. I felt physically ill. Emily hadn't just plotted to kill me, she was ready to frame Daniel if it failed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You can't hide behind lawyers forever, old woman. Patricia leaned over. That's witness intimidation. We'll trace it. Don't bother, I said, already calling my security team. Emily's out on bond. I expected this. What do you mean? I gave a thin smile. Detective Reed once told me Emily was playing chess. She's wrong. I've been playing in 3 dimensions for decades. Emily's about to learn the difference. Mrs. Ellis, what aren't you telling me? That I've been recording everything since the day they moved into my home, I said quietly. Including the nights they discussed what to do if their first attempt to murder me didn't work. Prosecutor Valdez's expression darkened. You have recordings of them discussing contingencies. 3 months' worth, I said evenly. Emily's nothing if not thorough. She planned for everything, except the possibility that her intended victim might be smarter than her would-be killers. Her first mistake came 12 hours later. At 3 a.m, my security team called. Someone was trying to break into my old house, the same one she tried to burn down with me in it. Detective Olivia Reed phoned moments later. She's been staking out the property. Apparently, she hid something there and came back to retrieve it. What kind of something? A second insurance policy, Reed replied. $10 million. Taken out last week under your forged signature. Even after arrest, trial, and the threat of life in prison, Emily was still trying to profit from my death. When I arrived, the scene was chaos: flashing lights, shouting officers, and Emily Ellis in handcuffs, screaming about police harassment. When she saw me, her face twisted into venom. This isn't over, she hissed. You think you're untouchable, Margaret, but I know things that could destroy your perfect reputation. Really? I said, voice steady. By all means, enlighten me. Your husband's death, she spat. It wasn't as natural as everyone believes. The words sliced through the air. Several officers turned toward me. Emily, I said quietly, David died of pancreatic cancer. There were 4 doctors, a hospital full of witnesses, and records that prove it. How convenient, she sneered. He signs a will leaving everything to you instead of Daniel, then conveniently dies days later. Detective Reed stepped forward. Ms. Ellis, are you making a formal accusation? Emily's lawyer, disheveled and half awake, grabbed her arm. Don't say another word. But Emily had lost control. She poisoned him just like I poisoned her. The only difference is she got away with it. Gasps rippled through the officers. Her attorney went pale. And for the first time in 30 years, I felt something close to fear, not because her claim was true, but because I could see doubt flicker in their eyes. David had died in a hospital bed after months of agony, but Emily had found a weapon I hadn't anticipated: suspicion. "Detective Reed," I said, forcing calm, "I assume you'll want to examine my husband's medical files." "That won't be necessary, Mrs. Ellis," she replied. "We already have extensive documentation of his illness and passing." This looks like a desperate attempt to stir doubt. Still, I could read the uncertainty on their faces. Emily had found my only real weakness: the one person I couldn't defend was dead. Reed turned back to her. "Ms. Ellis, your statement has been recorded. If you'd like to make a formal accusation, we can arrange that." Emily's lawyer clamped a hand over her mouth. "My client declines further comment." As they led her away, she twisted free just long enough to scream, "Check her medicine cabinet. Check what she keeps in her bedroom. She's not the victim she pretends to be." Hours later, I sat in my car, staring into the darkness. Her outburst wasn't random, it was deliberate. She'd been inside my home. She'd searched for something. I called Philip Kane. "Meet me at my house. Now." "Margaret, it's 4 a.m. She just accused me of killing David. She mentioned my medicine cabinet and my bedroom. She's been looking for evidence." 40 minutes later, Philip and I stood in my bedroom with 2 officers. My medicine cabinet held nothing but the mundane: blood pressure pills, vitamins, an old prescription for sleeping tablets from after David's death. But inside the wall safe, behind my jewelry box, was something I hadn't touched in years: an envelope. The handwriting stopped me cold. "For Margaret, in case anything happens to me. David." I opened it carefully. The letter inside was dated a week before he'd died. "Margaret, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But there's something you should know about Daniel and Emily. They've been asking about my will, about your finances, about what would happen if both of us were gone. Emily's been curious about medication interactions, how certain drugs might speed illness. I hoped I was wrong, but if I'm not, please be careful. Our son may not be the man we thought we raised. D." The paper shook slightly in my hands. They'd started this long before the fire, before David even passed. The betrayal stretched back years. One of the officers spoke softly. "Mrs. Ellis, this letter suggests your husband suspected they might harm you." "Yes," I whispered. "He tried to warn me, from the grave." When the trial began that October, the courthouse looked like a carnival. Reporters lined the steps, headlines screamed from every screen: "Billionaire mother versus killer family. A fortune built on blood." I wore a sharp black suit, the kind that said I was no one's victim. Daniel looked frail, hollow-eyed, smaller than I remembered. Emily, seated apart from him, looked almost angelic in a modest navy dress that probably cost a fortune. Her mask of innocence was perfect. Prosecutor Valdez opened strong. "This case is about greed so insidious it turned family into predators. A son who saw his mother as an obstacle. A daughter-in-law who turned poison into profit." Daniel's lawyer went for sympathy. "Daniel Ellis is a man who lost his way. Wanting his mother's approval and inheritance isn't the same as wanting her dead." Emily's lawyer, however, aimed directly at me. "My client was manipulated by a brilliant, controlling woman, Margaret Ellis herself. The evidence will show Mrs. Ellis built a lifetime of control through money, and when that control was threatened, she engineered this entire tragedy to eliminate the threat. Clever. Emily wasn't the villain now, she was my victim." The first week covered the facts: poisoning, financial records, the fire. But it was during cross-examination that her lawyer bared his teeth. "Mrs. Ellis," he began smoothly, "you recorded private conversations with your son without his consent. I documented financial discussions for my protection. So you spied on your own family. I protected myself from people stealing from me. Stealing, or taking what they believed was rightfully theirs. The prosecutor objected, but the damage was done. He'd planted the image, me as a paranoid control freak. In 30 years, Mrs. Ellis, he continued, pacing before the jury, how many times did your son ask you to stop giving him money? I hesitated. Never. He never said, I don't want your help anymore. Never said, I want to be independent. No. So, he accepted your money freely. Yes. And in return, you expected, what? Nothing. Nothing. He raised an eyebrow. No gratitude. No visits. No say in how your generosity was used. Each question sliced cleanly. He was transforming my love into leverage, my care into control. When Daniel developed a gambling problem, he pressed, did you seek professional help for him? I exhaled slowly, feeling the courtroom tighten around me. The trial wasn't just about who tried to kill me anymore. It was about who the world would believe I was. That night, I sat alone in my hotel room, staring at the city lights outside. The cross-examination echoed in my head like a cruel song. Emily's lawyer had been masterful. Every act of love I'd shown my son, Daniel, turned into an accusation. Helping him pay his debts wasn't compassion anymore, it was control. Protecting him wasn't maternal, it was manipulation. At 10 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. Philip Kane, my attorney, stood there with a manila folder in hand. Margaret, he said quietly, we need to talk about tomorrow's testimony. I looked up from the city skyline. They're going to make me sound like a monster, aren't they? He exhaled. They're going to try. But we have something they don't expect. He placed the folder on the table. Remember when you had your investigators tailing Daniel and Emily after the hospital incident? They didn't just record their meetings. They caught conversations, private ones. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the folder. The transcripts were time-stamped, 3 weeks before the fire. Emily's voice filled the page, she's weaker than I thought. A few more doses, and she won't be able to sign her name. Then Daniel, what if someone notices the symptoms? Emily's response chilled me, who's going to notice? You're her only family, and you're helping me dose her. Perfect plan. Daniel, I feel sick about this. Emily, you'll feel sicker when those Atlantic City people kill you for what you owe. This is survival, not murder. Daniel, it's exactly murder. Emily, no. It's evolution. She's old, alone, and in our way. Nature's just getting a little help. By the time I reached page 4, my vision blurred. The fire has to look accidental. Make sure the gasoline burns clean. If there's residue, we're finished. What if she wakes up? What if she gets out? She won't, Emily said. I gave her double the usual dose. She'll sleep right through it. I lowered the pages, my pulse pounding in my ears. They were going to burn me alive, I whispered. Philip nodded grimly. Premeditation. First-degree murder. The recordings are admissible. The death penalty's back on the table. Outside the window, families laughed in apartments across the street, people who didn't have to wonder if their own children wanted them dead. Play them, I said. Tomorrow. All of them. I want the jury to hear every word. The next day, the courtroom was electric. When the recordings played, Daniel's face went white. Halfway through, he vomited into a trash can. Emily sat motionless, the portrait of composure, though her eyes darted from juror to juror, gauging reactions like a chess player mapping her next move. The prosecutor didn't rush. She let the silence stretch after the last word. Then she called her final witness, Dr. Sarah Chen, the toxicologist. Dr. Chen, she began, what level of digitalis did you find in Mrs. Ellis's system? Enough to trigger severe cardiac episodes in someone her age, Dr. Chen replied calmly. A few more weeks and it would have appeared to be heart failure. Was it detectable under normal testing? Not likely. It mimics dementia and age-related decline almost perfectly. In your professional opinion, was this a sophisticated poisoning? Extremely. Someone with pharmaceutical expertise carefully calibrated the doses, enough to weaken her, not kill her outright. Emily's attorney sprang up for cross-examination, but Dr. Chen dismantled every suggestion of mistake or coincidence. Then Daniel's lawyer tried a desperate angle. Dr. Chen, he said, is it possible that Mrs. Ellis poisoned herself, to frame my client? The courtroom went still. Dr. Chen didn't blink. Are you suggesting a 72-year-old woman intentionally poisoned herself for months, collected evidence, and orchestrated an arson plot to implicate her son? The lawyer hesitated. I'm asking if it's possible. It would require the psychological profile of a sociopath and the resources of a criminal mastermind, she said crisply. My analysis shows a victim, not a perpetrator. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. I saw it flicker across a few jurors' faces. Victim or manipulator, they weren't sure anymore. During lunch recess, Emily's lawyer found me near the elevators. Mrs. Ellis, he said smoothly, my client intends to testify that you orchestrated all of this. Really? I asked. And how exactly did I plan my own murder? You discovered your son's gambling debts, he said, and decided to cut him out. You poisoned yourself to create evidence, staged the fire, and framed them both. Motivation? To protect your fortune. The audacity almost made me laugh. Tell your client I'm flattered she thinks I'm that creative. That afternoon, Emily took the stand. Dressed in pale gray, she looked like grief incarnate. Her voice trembled as she addressed the jury. I loved Margaret like a mother, she said tearfully. But she was controlling. Nothing was ever enough. She used money to control every part of our lives. Can you give an example? Her attorney prompted. When Daniel wanted a new job, she threatened to cut off his allowance. When we wanted kids, she said she wouldn't help unless we moved closer. Everything came with strings. And as for the poisoning, I never hurt her. She was paranoid, forgetful, self-medicating. She needed help. The prosecutor rose, eyes sharp. Ms. Ellis, you worked in pharmaceuticals, correct? Yes. So you understand how digitalis works. I sold medications, not made them. But you would know how to obtain digitalis. And recognize its symptoms. Objection. Overruled. Emily's lips trembled. I suppose I might. And yet, the prosecutor pressed, when Margaret displayed textbook symptoms, you never once mentioned digitalis to a doctor. Emily faltered. It never occurred to me. Her pause was fatal. The jury saw it. When court recessed, Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes as he was led away. Emily, however, did. Her gaze was steady, almost amused, a quiet promise that the game wasn't finished. 18 hours later, the jury reached a verdict. I spent those hours alone again, watching the skyline of the city I'd built my life in. The lights glowed warm, indifferent. Somewhere out there, people were falling in love, making dinner, living without fear of betrayal. I wondered what that felt like. Philip entered quietly. They've asked to review the recordings twice, he said. They're looking at the insurance records again. They're being thorough. At 3 o'clock the next afternoon, the call came. Verdict reached. Whatever it was, I'd already won the only victory that mattered. I was still alive to hear it. The courtroom was overflowing, cameras flashing, whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Reporters, curious onlookers, and people who'd followed every twist of the case leaned forward as the judge entered. I sat in the front row, wearing the same black suit I'd worn since the trial began, hands clasped tightly in my lap. Judge Helen Crawford's voice cut through the noise. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree against Margaret Ellis, how do you find?" "Guilty." Daniel's shoulders slumped. His attorney placed a hand on his arm, but he stared straight at me, expression unreadable. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find?" "Guilty." "And on the charge of arson in the first degree?" "Guilty." I heard gasps, a murmur of satisfaction from somewhere in the gallery. But I didn't move. My pulse was steady. This was what justice sounded like. Then came Emily's verdict. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, arson, fraud, and poisoning. The jury hadn't bought her act for a second. Judge Crawford announced sentencing would take place the following week. The prosecutor, Patricia Valdez, had already confirmed she'd seek life without parole for both defendants. As officers approached to lead Daniel away, he turned toward me. "Mom," he called out across the courtroom, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry." For the first time in months, I saw not the man who tried to kill me, but the frightened boy I once tucked into bed. I met his eyes. "I know you are," I said quietly. "But sorry doesn't bring back the mother you threw away when you decided money mattered more than love." That night, in my hotel room, I finally cried. Not for Daniel or Emily, they'd made their choices, but for the illusion of family I'd believed in. I cried for 30 years of love that turned out to be one-sided, for the laughter that had been counterfeit, for the son who had seen me as a vault instead of a mother. The phone rang. Detective Olivia Reed's voice came through. "Mrs. Ellis, I wanted to call personally. Justice was served today." "Was it?" I asked softly. "My son will die in prison. His wife will too. I'm alive, yes, but alone. I'm not sure that's winning." She paused. "You survived, Margaret. You fought back. You proved that experience and intellect can beat greed. That's victory in my book." When I hung up, I stood by the window and looked out at the city lights. Tomorrow, I'd go home, not to the mansion where I'd nearly died, but to start over. I had $3 billion, a sharp mind, and time. What I didn't have was a family. But maybe that was a kind of freedom. 6 months later, I sat on the deck of my new home in Santa Barbara, watching the sun sink into the Pacific. The waves glowed orange and gold. The house was smaller than my old estate, but every inch of it was mine, peaceful, safe, untouched by betrayal. No hidden cameras. No tampered food. No pretense of love. Just me, my thoughts, and a future I controlled. My neighbor, Eleanor, walked over carrying 2 glasses of wine. She was 75, widowed, and as blunt as I liked my company. She handed me a glass and eased into the chair beside me. "Any regrets?" she asked, the same question she asked almost every evening. I thought for a long moment. About surviving? Not for a second. About the family I lost, every day. But then I remember, that family never really existed. Eleanor nodded. "And the money?" I smiled faintly. It was never about the money. Daniel could have had everything if he'd just waited. If he'd treated me with a fraction of the love I gave him. Instead, he traded his soul for greed, and lost it all. Do you think he understands that now? I think he finally understands consequences, I said. Whether he understands love, that's not my problem anymore. The sun dipped below the horizon, and I raised my glass to the fading light. To survival, I whispered. Because sometimes, the best revenge against those who want you gone is simply refusing to disappear. Daniel and Emily had tried to erase me from my own story, but in doing so, they'd written my rebirth. They'd taken themselves out of the picture and left me with something money could never buy: certainty. The certainty that I was strong enough, clever enough, and relentless enough to outlast anyone who mistook kindness for weakness. And that, I decided, was the kind of victory that no verdict could measure. Thanks for listening. If you've ever survived betrayal and built yourself back stronger, your story matters. Share it. Someone out there needs to hear it.